What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actresses walks into what should be a simple interview only to be met with condescension and disrespect? In just 32 seconds, everything fell apart. One comment, one dismissive remark, and Dame Judi Dench had enough. This is the story of how a respected icon was pushed too far by a host who forgot who she was dealing with. The morning started like any other on the set. Judi Dench arrived at the studio with her usual grace and warmth. She was there to promote her latest project, a film that had been receiving incredible reviews across the country. The audience was excited. This was supposed to be a celebration of her work, a chance for fans to hear from one of the greatest actresses of all time. But from the moment Judy sat down on that couch, something felt off. The host greeted her with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. There was a tension in the air that the audience could not quite place. Judy, ever the professional, smiled warmly and settled into her seat, ready to discuss her passion for acting and the beautiful stories she helped bring to life. The interview began innocently enough. The host asked about the film, and Judy lit up as she spoke about the character she portrayed. Her eyes sparkled with genuine enthusiasm as she described the emotional journey of the role. This was what she loved. This was her craft. The audience leaned in, captivated by every word. Then the host cut her off mid-sentence. Judy paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. The host laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the studio. She turned to the panel members sitting beside her and made a comment that stopped everyone cold. The host said, and I quote, "Well, that is all very nice, dear, but do not you think you are a bit past your prime for these romantic roles?" The studio went silent. You could hear the collective intake of breath from the audience. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Judy's expression shifted. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by something cold and steely. She straightened in her seat, her posture rigid. One of the panel members, a younger television personality who was known for being outspoken, tried to smooth things over. She laughed nervously and said, "Oh, come now. She is just joking, Judy. You know how she is." But Judy was not having it. She turned to the panel member with a look that could cut glass. She said, "I do not find ageism particularly funny, do you?" The panel member's smile faltered. She stammered something about not meaning any offense, but Judy had already turned her attention back to the host. The host, for her part, seemed almost amused by the reaction she had provoked. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs casually, as if she had not just insulted one of the most respected actresses in the world. The host said, "Oh, do not be so sensitive. I'm simply saying that perhaps roles like these should go to younger actresses who can bring fresh energy to them. Surely you must see that?" Judy's jaw tightened. She took a slow breath, clearly trying to maintain her composure. The audience was on the edge of their seats. Another panel member, a film critic who had worked with Judy on several occasions, jumped in to defend her. The critic said, "With all due respect, Dame Judi Dench has more talent in her little finger than most actresses half her age have in their entire body. Age has nothing to do with the ability to portray emotion and truth on screen." The host rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes. She said, "Oh, please, let us not pretend that Hollywood is not a young person's game. Everyone knows it. I am just being honest about what everyone is thinking." That was it. That was the moment. Judy placed her hands on the armrests of the chair and began to stand. The host's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. Judy stood tall, her dignity intact despite the disrespect she had endured. Judy said, "I have spent over 6 decades in this industry. I have worked with the greatest directors, actors, and writers of our time. I have won every major award there is to win, and I will not sit here and be lectured about my place in this business by someone who clearly has no understanding of what it takes to truly create art." The host tried to laugh it off. She said, "Oh, Judy, come on, sit back down. You are being ridiculous." But Judy was already unhooking her microphone. Her movements were deliberate and calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that everyone could see. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching this extraordinary moment unfold. Another panel member, an older actor who had known Judy for years, stood up in solidarity. He said, "I think what Judy is trying to say, and what you clearly cannot grasp, is that this kind of attitude is exactly what is wrong with our industry. Talent does not have an expiration date." The host's face flushed red. She was losing control of her own show, and she knew it. She snapped, "Well, if you are both so offended, perhaps you should leave too." The older actor did not hesitate. He removed his microphone and stood beside Judy. The critic who had defended Judy earlier looked conflicted but ultimately decided to stay seated, though her discomfort was obvious. The young panel member who had tried to smooth things over earlier now looked horrified, realizing she had been complicit in the whole ugly scene. Judy turned to face the audience one last time. She said, "To anyone watching who has ever been told they are too old, too experienced, or too anything to pursue their passion, please know that your worth is not determined by someone else's narrow view of the world. Never let anyone diminish your light." The audience erupted into applause. It started with one person, then another, until the entire studio was on their feet, clapping and cheering for Judy. The host sat there, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment, unable to regain control. Judy nodded graciously to the audience, that familiar warmth returning to her expression, and walked off the set with her head held high. The older actor followed close behind her. As Judy disappeared backstage, the host tried desperately to salvage what was left of the show. She turned to the remaining panel members with a forced smile. She said, "Well, that was certainly unexpected. Shall we continue?" But the damage was done. The young panel member spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. She said, "I think I need to be honest here. What just happened was not okay. Dame Judi Dench deserves better than this. We all do." The host's smile vanished. She said, "Excuse me, you are here as my guest. I will not be lectured by you too." The young panel member stood up. She said, "Then I guess I am no longer your guest." And she walked off too. The critic remained in her seat, but she was clearly uncomfortable. She kept glancing toward the exit, where Judy had disappeared. The host was visibly flustered now. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. She tried to pivot to a commercial break, but her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. The cameras kept rolling for a few seconds longer than they should have, capturing her genuine distress. Backstage, Judy was surrounded by crew members who wanted to express their support. Many of them had worked in television for years and had witnessed this kind of behavior before, but no one had ever seen someone stand up to it quite like Judy just had. One makeup artist approached her with tears in her eyes. The makeup artist said, "Thank you for saying what you said. My mother is 68 and she was told she was too old to start a new career last year. She gave up on her dream because of people like that host. I wish she could have seen what you just did." Judy reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. She said, "Tell your mother it is never too late." "Tell her," Judi Dench said. So, the older actor who had walked out with Judy stood nearby, shaking his head in disbelief. He said, "I have been in this business for 40 years, and I have never seen anything quite like that. The arrogance, the disrespect. Who does she think she is?" Judy sighed. She said, "She thinks she is untouchable. She thinks that because she has a platform, she can say whatever she wants without consequence." But she forgot one very important thing. The actor asked, "What is that?" Judy smiled, a knowing smile that held decades of wisdom. She said, "She forgot that respect is earned, not given, and she certainly has not earned mine." Back on set, the host was trying to continue the show with just the critic remaining on the panel, but the energy was completely gone. The audience was no longer engaged. They were whispering among themselves, clearly discussing what they had just witnessed. The host kept glancing at the empty chairs where Judy and the others had been sitting, and each time she did, her irritation grew more visible. The host tried to make a joke about the situation. She said, "Well, I suppose some people just cannot handle a bit of honest conversation, can they?" The critic, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke up. Her voice was measured but firm. She said, "I think what people cannot handle is being disrespected for no reason. Dame Judi Dench is a legend. What you said to her was not honest conversation. It was cruel and unnecessary." The host's eyes narrowed. She said, "Are you seriously defending her right now, after she just walked out on my show?" The critic nodded. She said, "Yes, I am, because she was right to walk out. And honestly, I am not sure why I am still sitting here. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife." The host opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was speechless, a rare occurrence for someone who made her living talking. The production team in the control room was scrambling, trying to figure out how to end this disaster of a segment. Finally, mercifully, they cut to a commercial. But even during the break, the damage continued. The host refused to apologize, insisting that she had done nothing wrong. She told the producers that Judy was being overly sensitive and that the whole thing was being blown out of proportion. Meanwhile, Judy was gathering her things and preparing to leave the building. A producer approached her, clearly nervous. He said, "Dame Judy, I am so sorry about what happened. Is there anything we can do to make this right?" Judy looked at him kindly. She said, "You can start by having a serious conversation with your host about the way she treats her guests. Rudeness should not be mistaken for entertainment." The producer nodded vigorously. He said, Of course. We will definitely address this." Judy gave him a small smile, though it did not quite reach her eyes. She had heard promises like this before. She said, "I hope you do, for the sake of every other guest who comes on this show." As Judy walked toward the exit, several audience members who had been allowed backstage during the commercial break approached her. They thanked her for standing up for herself and for sending such a powerful message. One elderly woman had tears streaming down her face. The woman said, "My granddaughter brought me here today because she knows how much I love your work. I am 73 years old, and I was told just last week that I should stop pursuing acting because I am too old. Watching you today gave me hope." Judy embraced the woman. She said, "Never stop pursuing what you love. Age is just a number. Talent and passion are timeless." Back in the studio, the show had resumed after the commercial break. The host was trying to act as if nothing had happened, but her discomfort was obvious. The critic was still on the panel, but she was barely participating. Every question the host asked was met with short, clipped responses. The host said, "So, moving on to our next topic, let us talk about the upcoming award season. Who do you think will take home the top prizes?" The critic said flatly, "Dame Judi Dench deserves every award for her latest performance. She is extraordinary in the film." The host's jaw clenched. She said, "Right. Well, let us hear from some other perspectives then. Audience, what do you think?" But the audience was not interested in playing along anymore. One brave soul stood up and said, "I think we all just witnessed something very disturbing. That woman you disrespected is a national treasure. You owe her an apology." Several other audience members voiced their agreement. The host was losing control of her own show completely now. Her face was red, her hands were shaking slightly. She said, "I think we need to take another break." But before they could cut away, another audience member shouted, "No, we want to hear you apologize." The crowd began to murmur in agreement. It was unprecedented. The host looked to her producers for help, but they were just as stunned as everyone else. The host stood up from her chair. She said, "I am not going to apologize for speaking my mind. If people cannot handle honesty, that is their problem, not mine." The critic stood up too. She said, "You know what? I am done here." And she walked off the set, leaving the host completely alone. The audience erupted into applause once again, this time even louder than before. The host stood there, abandoned by her guests and rejected by her audience. The reality of what she had done finally sinking in. Outside the studio, Judy was climbing into her car when she heard footsteps behind her. It was the young panel member who had also walked out. The young woman looked embarrassed. She said, "Dame Judy, I just wanted to say I am sorry. I should have stood up for you immediately instead of trying to make excuses for her behavior." Judy smiled warmly. She said, "You did stand up eventually. That takes courage. Do not be too hard on yourself." The young woman looked relieved. She said, "I have always admired your work. Today I learned that you are just as impressive off-screen as you are on it." Judy reached out and squeezed her hand. She said, "Remember this moment. Remember that staying silent in the face of injustice makes us complicit. Use your voice, even when it is difficult." The young woman nodded, clearly moved by the conversation. She said, "I will. Thank you." As Judy's car pulled away from the studio, she looked out the window at the building one last time. She felt no regret about walking out. In fact, she felt empowered. She had stood up for herself and in doing so, had stood up for every person who had ever been dismissed or diminished because of their age. Inside the studio, chaos reigned. The producers were in emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The host was in her dressing room, refusing to come out or speak to anyone. The remaining crew members were discussing what they had witnessed, many of them expressing admiration for Judy and disappointment in their host. One crew member said, "I have worked on this show for 5 years and I have never seen anything like that." She really thought she could talk to Dame Judi Dench that way and get away with it. Another crew member replied, "The worst part is that this is not the first time she has been rude to a guest. It is just the first time someone had the guts to call her out on it publicly." The conversations continued throughout the day. People were taking sides, though the overwhelming majority sided with Judy. Even those who had previously defended the host found it difficult to justify her behavior this time. What she had said was indefensible, and the way she had doubled down on it made things even worse. That evening, as Judy sat in her home reflecting on the day's events, she received a phone call from the older actor who had walked out with her. He said, "I just wanted to check in and see how you were doing." Judy said, "I'm doing well, actually. Better than I expected. How about you?" He laughed. He said, "I am fantastic. I've been getting messages all day from people thanking us for what we did. Apparently, we have become accidental heroes." Judy smiled. She said, "We are not heroes. We simply refuse to be disrespected. Everyone should do the same." He said, "Well, hero or not, you certainly made an impact today. That host will think twice before she tries to belittle someone again." They talked for a while longer, discussing the industry, the changing attitudes toward age, and the importance of standing up for oneself. When they finally hung up, Judy felt a sense of peace. She had handled the situation with grace and dignity, and she had no regrets. The next morning, the story had spread far beyond the studio. People everywhere were talking about what had happened. Social media was flooded with support for Judy. Many shared their own experiences of being dismissed or underestimated because of their age. The conversation Judy had sparked was exactly the kind of dialogue that needed to happen. As for the host, she faced a reckoning. Her refusal to apologize and her insistence that she had done nothing wrong had turned public opinion firmly against her. The very platform she thought made her untouchable had become her undoing. People were calling for accountability, demanding that she face consequences for her actions. But this is not about what happened to the host after that day. This is about what happened in that studio, in those moments when Judi Dench decided she had had enough. It is about the courage it takes to stand up for yourself when someone tries to diminish you. It is about refusing to accept disrespect, no matter who it comes from. Judi Dench walked onto that set as a guest, someone who was there to share her work and connect with an audience. She walked off that set as something more. She walked off as a symbol of dignity, strength, and the refusal to be treated as anything less than she deserved. In 32 seconds, everything changed. One comment from the host that revealed her true colors, one dismissive remark that showed her complete lack of respect, and in response, one decision from Judy that showed the world what real class looks like. The host thought she was running the show. She thought she was in control. But what she failed to understand is that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And on that day, in that studio, in front of that audience, she lost whatever respect she might have once had. Judi Dench reminded everyone watching that we all have the power to walk away from situations that do not serve us. We all have the right to demand better treatment. And we should never, ever allow anyone to make us feel small, no matter how big their platform might be. That is the real story here. Not the drama, not the conflict, but the lesson. Stand up for yourself. Know your worth. And never let anyone convince you that you are anything less than extraordinary, regardless of your age, your experience, or anything else they might try to use against you. Judi Dench did not need that show. The show needed her. And when they forgot that, when the host forgot who she was dealing with, Judy reminded them in the most powerful way possible. She simply stood up and walked away, leaving behind a studio full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own disrespect. Judy understood that, and on that day, she showed the world exactly what that looks like. Let us go back to those crucial moments just before everything fell apart. The host had been building up to this confrontation from the very beginning. You could see it in the way she introduced Judy. There was no warmth in her voice, no genuine excitement. It was all performance, all surface level, pleasantries masking something darker underneath. When Judy first walked onto the stage, the audience gave her a standing ovation. They loved her. They respected her. But the host barely acknowledged the applause. She rushed through the introduction, clearly eager to get to whatever agenda she had planned. And that agenda, as it turned out, was to undermine one of the greatest actresses of all time. The first few questions seemed innocent enough. The host asked about the film, about the character, about the experience of working with the director. Judy answered each question with enthusiasm and professionalism. She spoke about the emotional depth of the role, the challenges of bringing such a complex character to life, and the joy of working with talented collaborators. But then the host started steering the conversation in a different direction. She brought up Judy's age. not directly at first, but through subtle comments and loaded questions. She asked things like, "How does it feel to still be working at this stage of your career?" And, "Do you ever think about slowing down and letting the younger generation take over?" Judy handled these questions with grace. She talked about how acting was her passion, how she had no intention of stopping as long as she was able to work. She spoke about the importance of experience and how it enriches performances. But the host was not satisfied with these answers. She wanted to push harder, to provoke a reaction. That was when she made the comment about Judy being past her prime. The words hung in the air like poison. The panel members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The audience went silent. Everyone knew that something terrible had just happened, but they were too shocked to react immediately. Judy's face betrayed nothing at first. She was too professional, too experienced to let her emotions show right away, but you could see it in her eyes. The hurt, the anger, the disbelief that someone would actually say something so disrespectful to her face. And then came the resolve, the decision that she was not going to tolerate this treatment. When the young panel member tried to laugh it off and defend the host, Judy shut that down immediately. Her response about not finding ageism funny was delivered with such precision, such controlled intensity, that it left no room for misinterpretation. This was not a joke. This was not acceptable. And Judy was not going to pretend otherwise. The host made her second critical mistake when she doubled down on her initial comment. Instead of reading the room and backing off, she pushed forward with even more condescending remarks. She suggested that younger actresses should get the roles instead. She implied that fresh energy was more valuable than experience. She basically said, without directly saying it, that Judy's time had passed. The film critic on the panel tried to defend Judy by praising her talent. It was a valiant effort, and Judy appreciated it. But the host would not be deterred. She rolled her eyes, dismissing decades of accomplishment and artistry with a single gesture. That eye roll said more than any words could. It showed exactly how little respect she had for Judy, and by extension, for anyone who did not fit her narrow definition of relevance. When Judy stood up, time seemed to slow down. Everyone in the studio held their breath. Would she leave? Would she confront the host? Would she say something? The tension was unbearable. And then Judy spoke, and her words cut through the tension like a knife through butter. She talked about her 6 decades in the industry. She referenced her awards, her accomplishments, her body of work, but she did it without arrogance. She did it as a statement of fact, a reminder of who she was and what she had achieved. And then she delivered the final blow, saying she would not be lectured by someone who clearly did not understand what it took to create real art. That was when the host realized she had made a massive mistake. You could see it on her face. The confidence drained away, replaced by uncertainty and fear. She tried to recover by calling Judy ridiculous, but it was too late. The damage was done. Judy was leaving, and there was nothing the host could do to stop her. The older actor who stood up with Judy added another layer to the moment. His support was not just personal, it was professional. He was making a statement that this behavior was unacceptable in their industry. He was drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is not okay, and I will not be complicit in it by staying silent." Judy's final words to the audience were perhaps the most powerful part of the entire exchange. She did not attack the host. She did not stoop to that level. Instead, she spoke directly to anyone watching who had ever been made to feel less than. She told them their worth was not determined by someone else's narrow view. She encouraged them to never let anyone diminish their light. It was a message of empowerment, of hope, of resilience. The critic who eventually also left did so after the audience turned on the host. She had been trying to stay neutral, to salvage what she could of the situation. But when the host refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, when she insisted she had simply been honest, the critic could not stay silent anymore. Her departure was the final nail in the coffin of what had already become a complete disaster. The makeup artist who spoke to Judy about her mother was particularly moving. The story of a 68-year-old woman giving up on her dreams because someone told her she was too old resonated deeply with Judy. It was exactly why she had taken the stand she did. It was not just about her own dignity. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been dismissed or discouraged because of their age. Inside the studio, the chaos that followed was unprecedented. Producers scrambled to figure out what to do. The host refused to come out of her dressing room. Crew members openly discussed their disappointment with how things had been handled. It was clear that this was not just a bad interview. It was a turning point, a moment that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Judy's insistence that they were not heroes was typical of her humility. She saw what she had done as simply refusing to be disrespected. In her mind, that was not heroic, it was basic self-respect. But to the people watching, it was heroic because so many of them had been in similar situations and had not known how to respond, or had been too afraid to stand up for themselves. The lesson here is clear. You can be confident without being arrogant. You can stand up for yourself without tearing others down. You can command respect without demanding it. Judy demonstrated all of these things. The host demonstrated the opposite. What happened that day in the studio was more than just a confrontation between two people. It was a statement about values, about how we treat each other, about what we consider acceptable behavior. Judy drew a line and said, "This is not acceptable." And by doing so, she gave permission to countless others to draw similar lines in their own lives. This is why the story matters, because it represents something bigger than one incident on one show. It represents the courage to say enough, the courage to know your worth and refuse to settle for less, the courage to stand up even when it is uncomfortable or inconvenient. Judi Dench walked into that studio as a guest. She left as an inspiration, not because she planned it that way, but because when faced with a choice between accepting disrespect and standing up for herself, she chose herself. And in doing so, she showed the world that it is never too late to demand better, to expect more, to refuse to settle for treatment that diminishes who you are and what you have accomplished.